He was supposed to be Liverpool's golden weapon, the elegant assassin who could glide through chaos and finish with ice in his veins. The striker who made goals look effortless, who carried Newcastle United into the light.
Do you rate Isak?
I think with the season that he had last season, I think he's up there with, if not the best striker in the league. Do I rate him? Yes, obviously I rate him. I think he's a great striker, what he can give you off and on the ball.
And who convinced the champions of England to break the British transfer record, £125 million, just to make him theirs.
Alexander Isak is Liverpool's new number 9. They've confirmed it officially now. He has signed in a British record transfer of £125 million.
Instead, he became its greatest question mark. From Newcastle's messiah to Liverpool's mystery, Alexander Isak has gone from unstoppable to uncertain, a superstar caught between brilliance and blame. But this isn't the story of a player who failed. It's the story of a man trapped between expectation and adaptation, between what he was and what he's still trying to become. This is the fight of Alexander Isak, the boy from Solna who became a sensation and now stands on the edge of redemption. What the hell happened to Alexander Isak? Before the lights of the Premier League, before the price tags and the pressure, there was just a boy in Solna, a quiet suburb of Stockholm where football dreams are built on frozen pitches and endless repetition. Alexander Isak was born there on the 21st of September 1999, the son of Eritrean parents who had fled conflict in search of peace. What they found was a child with a gift, balance, grace, and that eerie calm that only the great strikers possess. At just 6 years old, he joined his boyhood club, AIK, and within a decade, he wasn't just another academy kid, he was the kid. By 16, he had already made history, scoring on his professional debut and becoming the youngest goal scorer in the club's long history. Sweden's newspapers couldn't get enough of him. The new Zlatan, they said. And this time, it wasn't lazy journalism. He had the same elegance, the same arrogance in front of goal, but without the noise. By 17, Europe was watching. Borussia Dortmund made their move, paying what was then a record fee for a Swedish teenager. But at Dortmund, the story slowed. Big club, bigger egos. Minutes were rare, confidence harder to find. The fairy tale threatened to fade before it began. So Isak did what the brave ones do. He left to Willem II in the Netherlands, a club most of Europe ignored. But there, in a smaller stadium under grey Dutch skies, Isak exploded. Hat tricks, penalties, cold-blooded finishes. 12 goals in his first 12 games. He didn't just score, he reinvented himself. That rebirth caught the eye of Real Sociedad, who brought him to Spain in 2019. In San Sebastian, he became something new again. Polished, intelligent, unselfish. His touch sharper, his link play smoother, his calm unmatched. In 2021, he lifted his first major trophy, the Copa del Rey, and earned his first call-up as Sweden's main striker. By then, he was no longer the new Zlatan. He was simply Alexander Isak, a name Europe had learned to say properly. But even at Sociedad, the Premier League shadows lingered. English scouts circled, and when Newcastle United came knocking in 2022, the fit felt almost poetic. A club reborn, chasing an identity. A striker reborn, chasing a legacy. £63 million, a record fee for Newcastle United.
Alexander Isak, but that's exactly where we are, given the fact it looks like he's on his way to Newcastle for an extraordinary amount of money. It's talk of $70 million plus bonuses.
The pressure was instant, the expectation unforgiving. Yet when he debuted at Anfield against Liverpool, he silenced the noise in just 36 minutes. One perfect touch, one cold finish past Alisson, and suddenly every Newcastle fan believed again. A new era had arrived. For a moment, it felt like destiny. But destiny, as Isak would soon learn, doesn't always wait. And behind that smile, behind the promise, something fragile was already forming. The storm was coming. There are seasons that define a player, and then there are seasons that rewrite who they are. For Alexander Isak, that season was 2023 to 2024. When Newcastle United kicked off their campaign, few expected the young Swede to carry the entire weight of their attack. Callum Wilson was aging, injuries were piling up, and the goals had dried. But Isak, he looked like he had been carved from calm and lightning. By the summer of 2023, Newcastle United were no longer outsiders. They had fought their way into the Champions League for the first time in 2 decades, and at the center of it all stood a tall, smooth striker with an easy smile and ice in his veins, Alexander Isak. The whispers had turned into headlines. Newcastle's new superstar. And if there were still doubters, they didn't last long. The season opened under bright lights at St. James's Park, and Aston Villa never knew what hit them. In a blistering 5-1 victory, Isak scored twice. One pure instinct, one pure artistry, dancing past defenders with that effortless glide that made football look like choreography. His calm celebration said it all. This was just the beginning. From that moment, the numbers started piling up like a scoreboard on fire. By September, he'd scored the winner against Manchester City in the EFL Cup, ending Newcastle's 11-game drought against Pep Guardiola's side. And when Chelsea arrived in November, Isak made it look like training. Another goal, another effortless finish. But this wasn't just about goals, it was about timing. Each strike came when Newcastle needed him most. When pressure rose, Isak didn't panic. He waited, watched, and punished. That's what separated him from the rest. His stillness and chaos. By winter, the Champions League anthem echoed across St. James's Park, and Isak embraced the stage as if he'd been there all his life. In November 2023, away to Paris Saint-Germain, he scored a cold-blooded opener, a poacher's finish against Donnarumma, before a controversial penalty robbed Newcastle of a historic win. But the message was sent. Isak could do it on Europe's biggest nights too. His numbers were staggering. 17 goals by April 2024, then 19, then 21, breaking Zlatan Ibrahimovic's record for the most goals by a Swedish player in a Premier League season. Every finish was surgical, every movement premeditated. He didn't just play football, he solved it. In mid-April, Newcastle dismantled Tottenham 4-0. Isak scored twice. Smooth, predatory, ruthless. 2 weeks later, against Sheffield United, he added another brace, crossing the 20-goal mark and entering the race with Haaland and Palmer for the Golden Boot. By season's end, he had 21 league goals, 4 assists, and a growing reputation as one of Europe's most complete forwards. He didn't just lead Newcastle's attack, he defined it. His partnership with Anthony Gordon was poetry in motion. Gordon's chaos, Isak's calm, and behind them, the Geordie crowd sang his name like a hymn. That season, Alexander Isak was more than a player. He was Newcastle's symbol of hope, confidence, and class. Then came December, the month that made him a star. 8 goals, 2 assists, 6 consecutive games with his name on the score sheet. He was voted Premier League Player of the Month, becoming the first Swedish player since Zlatan Ibrahimović in 2016 to win the award. One of those goals, a curling strike against Liverpool in a 3-3 draw, also won the goal of the month, a strike that seemed to defy geometry. At that point, Isak wasn't just in form, he was in flow. Everything he touched found the net. Everything he imagined turned into applause. In February, he scored his 50th Premier League goal with a brace against Nottingham Forest, a personal milestone that underscored just how fast he was rising. Then, on March 16th, he etched his name in Newcastle folklore, scoring in a 2-1 win over Liverpool in the EFL Cup final, sealing the club's first domestic trophy since 1955. The Geordie faithful lifted banners of his face. Kids wore his number 14. The city, once grey and forgotten, pulsed with belief again because of him. But even in that celebration, there was a shadow. He had started limping more often. He stretched a little longer before games. The groin pain, the same one that haunted him since Spain, had returned. Still, he played, because how do you sit out when you're living your dream? By June, he was among the PFA Player of the Year nominees, standing alongside the biggest names in the league. Newcastle finished high, proud and grateful. And yet, Isak's smile had changed. Behind closed doors, conversations began about ambition, about promises, about what came next. Then came the negotiations. Behind closed doors, Isak's representatives began talks about a new contract, one that reflected his value. Newcastle, proud but cautious, delayed, and while the club hesitated, the vultures circled. Liverpool, Arsenal, even PSG. The striker who'd brought Newcastle back to relevance was now the subject of transfer speculation every week. By July 2025, it was no longer whispers, it was war. Isak refused to travel for pre-season. The club issued statements, and then came the now infamous words that broke the relationship beyond repair. When promises are broken and trust is lost, the relationship can't continue. Those words weren't from a journalist, they were from Isak himself. On Instagram, the boy from Solna, the striker of the people, had gone silent on the pitch and loud online. Inside the dressing room, silence grew. Some teammates felt betrayed, others understood. But one thing was clear, Alexander Isak's time at Newcastle United was over. For the first time, Newcastle fans turned from awe to anger. The fairy tale had cracked, and behind it was the brutal truth. Football doesn't care how much you gave yesterday, only what you'll give tomorrow. Isak got his move. Liverpool paid £125 million, a British transfer record. But when he walked into Anfield, the cheers were cautious. The smile was thinner, the air was heavier. He had climbed the mountain, now he was standing at the edge of the fall. There's always a moment when brilliance stops looking like brilliance, when the same movements that once terrified defenders suddenly look out of place. For Alexander Isak, that moment came faster than anyone imagined. By October 2025, he had played 382 minutes for Liverpool, 1 goal, 11 shots, 5 on target, a stat line that told only half the story, but half was enough for the critics. Isak's problems didn't start at Anfield. They started before he even arrived. In the summer, as Newcastle prepared for their preseason tour, he was training alone, first at his former club Real Sociedad, then quietly in Tyneside, waiting for the transfer saga to end. No matches, no rhythm, no chemistry, just a player in limbo. When the deal finally went through on deadline day, September 1st, Liverpool got the striker they dreamt of, but not the version they thought they were buying. He hadn't played a competitive match in over 3 months. That lost rhythm would haunt him. By the time he made his debut on September 17th against Atletico Madrid, he was still effectively in preseason form. Except this wasn't preseason. These were Champions League's nights, where touches are precious and mistakes echo. As manager Arne Slot admitted weeks later, he's had his 5-6 weeks of preseason now. We can judge him fairly from here, but football isn't patient, especially not when you cost £125 million. Liverpool under Slot was a tactical experiment, pressing high, rotating wide, using wingers as secondary strikers. For Isak, it was a foreign dialect. At Newcastle, he thrived on rhythm and familiarity. The diagonal passes from Trippier, the low crosses from Jacob Murphy, the space created by Anthony Gordon's chaos. Murphy alone provided him 7 assists last season, a partnership built on repetition and instinct. At Liverpool, there was no such bond. Salah wanted to cut inside and shoot. Cody Gakpo drifted into the same pockets Isak needed. And Florian Wirtz, brilliant but new, was still learning his tempo. Instead of quick, low deliveries, Isak received hopeful long balls or awkward cutbacks. Instead of finding space behind defenders, he found himself with his back to goal, pinned between center backs. His shot map told the story: low volume, low quality, and expected goals, XG figure of 1.7 after 8 matches, a number that screamed isolation more than inefficiency. Against Manchester United, there was a moment, the kind that defines careers. Ibrahima Konate released him through on goal, one-on-one with the keeper. It was perfect, until it wasn't. The shot, usually placed with Isak's trademark calm, went too close to the keeper's legs. In another world, that finish curls into the far corner, the cop explodes, and the redemption arc begins. Instead, it became a meme. £125 million for that? One headline sneered. The same happened against Crystal Palace. A clever 1-2 with McAllister, the swivel, the feint, the flash. Wide. Even when he did everything right, something felt off. The balance, the sharpness, the inevitability. Form is fragile in football, confidence even more so. What most fans didn't see was that Isak wasn't just missing chances, he was missing opportunities. He simply wasn't being found. Liverpool's attack had changed. Their fullbacks weren't as advanced. Their wingers were more selfish. The team itself, still adjusting to Slot's system, was disjointed, conceding first in 3 straight games, forcing them into desperate chases instead of controlled build-ups. And that's poison for a player like Isak. He isn't a chaos striker, he's a rhythm striker. He thrives in control, not scramble. In those early matches, he touched the ball just 105 times in total, fewer than most midfielders manage in a single game. Often he drifted wide, searching for involvement. When he did drop deep to link play, as he did brilliantly with Wirtz against Atletico, the return pass never came. You could almost see the frustration hiding behind the poker face. At Newcastle, his chemistry with Murphy and Gordon had been telepathic. At Liverpool, the wires were still crossed. And then there's the other truth, the one no metric can measure. Alexander Isak has always been calm, quiet, self-contained. Even his teammates at Newcastle described him as hard to read. To some, that calm looked like arrogance. To others, it was control. Now at Liverpool, that same calm was being misinterpreted again, this time as apathy. He didn't rage after misses. He didn't gesture wildly. He just walked back, expression neutral. But inside, the pressure was cooking. The more people talked, the quieter he became. The more the headlines grew, the smaller his world felt. In a city that feeds on emotion, Isak's silence was his biggest sin. Inside the club, there's no panic. Virgil van Dijk has taken him under his wing. Slot has reminded the press that he was signed for 6 years, not 6 weeks. And behind closed doors, Liverpool believe it's only a matter of time before the rhythm returns. But football doesn't wait. The Premier League is a stage that punishes even temporary misfires. And as the weeks turn to months, every quiet game chips away at the myth he built at Newcastle. Football is cruel in how quickly it forgets. Last season's hero becomes this season's headline. The same fans who once screamed your name can scroll past your highlights like they never happened, and that's where Alexander Isak finds himself now. Not finished, but forgotten in conversation. He was supposed to be the final piece, the striker who would replace chaos with calm, instinct with intelligence. Instead, he's become a mirror, reflecting everything that's both right and wrong with modern football. A player who once symbolized patience now lives in a world that has none. A finisher who built his craft on rhythm now plays in a system of disorder. A quiet leader now judged by volume, not by vision. He hasn't fought back publicly. No interviews, no sound bites, no statements. Just training, just repetition. Those close to him say it's not apathy, it's focus. That silence is his rebellion. Because deep down, he knows something the rest of the football world seems to forget. He's done this before. In Dortmund, they said he wasn't ready. He left, found himself, and came back sharper. In Spain, they said he was too soft for La Liga, until he lifted a Copa del Rey. In England, they said he couldn't handle the physicality, until he broke Zlatan's record and carried Newcastle into the Champions League. Every setback has been followed by a surge. Every doubt, a defiant reminder. So maybe this isn't a downfall. Maybe it's just the pause before the next explosion. Inside Liverpool's training base in Kirkby, coaches whisper that something has changed in him recently. The sprints are sharper, the timing cleaner. He's staying after sessions, working with Wirtz and Mac Allister on finishing patterns, the same kind that once made him unstoppable at Newcastle. Small glimpses, small sparks, but football's greatest resurrections often start like this. And in those fleeting moments, a spin off the shoulder, a snap finish, a nod of quiet satisfaction, you can almost see the old Isak again, the calm before the roar. What makes his story compelling isn't the money or the hype, it's the contradiction. He's a player too quiet for a loud world, too elegant for a game that now celebrates chaos. But that's also what makes him rare. And rarity in football always finds its way back to relevance. He's only 26, still young enough to evolve, still old enough to remember what it takes. Somewhere deep inside that composed exterior, behind the headlines and the doubt, there's still the same boy from Solna, juggling a ball under gray skies, dreaming without limits. Alexander Isak isn't finished. He's wounded, misunderstood, recalibrating. The system broke rhythm. The pressure broke silence. But the story isn't over. Football doesn't grant you perfection. It grants you moments. And somewhere, another one is waiting for him. For Alexander Isak, the questions are louder than ever, but so was the criticism once for others who found their way back. The difference now, the price tag, the pressure, and a city that doesn't forgive easily. But legends aren't built in easy times. They're forged in noise. The next chapter isn't about goals, it's about response.